Hey everybody, you're listening to the Integrate Yourself podcast with Allison and Maya. This is episode 8. I'm Allison Pillow and I'm an intuitive fitness and nutrition coach, and you can find out more about the services I provide and how I help people at pureenergypdx.com. And Maya is a health integration specialist, and you can find out more about Maya at mayagottlieb.com. That's MAJAGOTTLIEB.com. Together, we share over 20 years' experience in the field, coaching clients and doing our own research, offering simple self-care strategies and a new perspective on nutrition, movement, and emotional intelligence. Today, we invite you to integrate yourself. We encourage you wholeheartedly to be your own authority when it comes to your health and wellness. Our intention is to share with you our perspective from our experience personally, coaching others, and years of doing our own research. We recommend you always think for yourself and come to your own conclusions. We offer insight on creativity, aging gracefully, and creating a high-energy life, one where you have the energy to live the life you love. Thank you to Michael Wynn of Michael Wynn Productions for providing the music for this podcast. And thanks to Maya for doing this podcast with me every week. And finally, lots of gratitude to our listeners for all the love and support you send us every week. We appreciate you so much. So today's topic is about movement and energy, and we're going to talk about how much is too much, how much movement in your life can be too much and be depleting, and what that looks like, as well as how much is not enough. Like, what does not enough movement look like in your life? And that can be equally as stressful. So we'll be talking about the energetic component of movement and how to balance that out for yourself, how to figure out if how much movement you need for that day based on your energy levels. I did want to share one other thing I thought was really interesting. I have this story that I started off with in this podcast where I talk about this woodpecker that has been pecking on the side of my house at this certain time of day, like midday, same time every day. Really interesting. And it's funny because after I told that story to Maya, she actually sent me this article. And I'm a big fan of animal totems and the medicine cards. I like to use them, the Native American medicine cards, for just kind of to get the imagination going, but also like just to look at things on a little bit of a deeper level. And so the woodpecker, sometimes when animals come into my life that I don't normally see on a daily basis, I always think, hey, what could that symbolize for me? I know maybe that sounds weird, but it really works for me. It helps me kind of get out of my left brain a little bit and think about things a little more outside the box. So I just thought I would share this with you guys today. And what the article that she sent me said, it was about the animal totem of the woodpecker and what that symbolized. And it said on there that it's a symbol of determination, and it also means having a heightened level of awareness. And it's so interesting to think about, like, when you see some kind of symbol and you don't think too much about it, but you just look at, hey, what could that mean for me? What can that symbolize? It's just interesting that a lot of times it's really in line with where you are in your life. And so it was really, really interesting for me to see that and to get that article from Maya, and it was really cool to be able to apply that to what I'm going through at this moment, and just realize that opportunities are knocking on my door, which I think was really, really cool. So something that can be really, maybe an irritant is actually maybe a sign that things are to come. So I thought I'd share that with you guys. I thought it was a cool little thing. And if you are interested in the animal totem thing, there's a book called Medicine Cards, and it's the Native American animal medicine. It's really great just to kind of refer to for fun and to look and see maybe the deeper side of what could be going on within you. So all right. So without further ado, let's start the show. So we have this bird that is this woodpecker that's pecking on the side of our house. So if you hear these loud noises during the podcast, that's this huge woodpecker, which is a beautiful bird, by the way, but he is just I couldn't figure out for the longest time what it was. I thought people were doing construction on the side, on our neighbors on the other side, because we live in townhouses. And every afternoon about this time, it happens, and I just couldn't figure it out. I thought it was our refrigerator or something was making noise, a weird noise. And so I just looked out of the side of the house, just around the corner, and there's this big, beautiful woodpecker just pecking away at the side of our house, really high up. So, if you hear that during the podcast, that's what it is.
Well, I
Can
can
you hear
tell
me?
you, yeah, I can hear you, but I don't hear the woodpecker
Okay.
anymore. So you may not,
Oh, good.
yeah,
Okay.
you may not have to worry.
May not be an issue. All right.
Right.
Cool. Yeah. So, today we were gonna talk about movement and how much is too much and how much is not enough.
Good question.
Yeah. That's a really good question because I think the majority of people think that lots of movement is always good. And although I do advocate moving every day, it's the energy expenditure of your movement, and that's what I tell people to pay attention to, because if you're pushing yourself to depletion more than you are able to handle for your more so you're creating more stress in your body, you're not able to replenish the energy fast enough, that can be pretty damaging to the body over time.
Right. It definitely causes the stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol, and the loss of glycogen. So it's definitely person specific in how your body works, and the level of how connected you are to your feedback loop is how you're going to know what's not enough and what's too much.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about, well, I mean, you were an endurance athlete, so you know very well what that kind of stress can do to your body.
Yes. So my history is definitely wasn't an athlete when I was younger. I progressed into being an athlete out of college and decided to start running, and I started doing, small race, local race here, which isn't really that small, but it's one of the top races that people do, and it's on probably the hottest days of the year, July 4th, and so it was kind of one of these days in my life where I was saying to myself, I want to try to do something different, and so I decided to run 6 miles, and in that I got, more information about how, 13 miles is coming up and Thanksgiving, and why don't you try this? And so when I did that, there was a part of me that just said, oh, I ran 6, why not 13? Then it got progressed to 26.2, and I'll shorten my little story, but I got into a lot of marathon training. I did the Boston, I did all the big ones, New York, Chicago, and had a great learning curve in terms of how to do endurance racing. And I got better and better, and then I met some other people that I started to talk about other things, and one person suggested that we do an Ironman. And I didn't even know what an Ironman was. I just had been swimming at my local YMCA doing the master's program because I love swimming. And I said okay to the Ironman thing, and the Ironman is a triathlon, which is 2.4 mile swim, 112-mile bike, and 26.2-mile run, and you have 17 hours to do it. So we all trained, and we did it as a relay for our big race, which we did Ironman Lake Placid. And so I did the swim, another person did the bike, and another person did the run, so that we could have an experience of what a big race would be like. And so long story short, I ended up doing 10 Ironmans in 8 years in all different types of races, all different areas of the world. And it was a great, great way of learning my body and how to push my body into, 6 to 8 hours of riding, or 4 or 5 hours of running. And these things were just long, and it was such a wonderful way of seeing that your body is capable of doing so many things, especially if you train and specifically for some certain things. And so when I learned about endurance, I believed that it was just my slow twitch muscles versus my fast twitch muscles, and that I was programmed more for that endurance. And now, as I see it, what has happened in turning around and looking at what my body was going through, I was pushing my body in a way of discovery, and kind of giving myself that knowing that if I really want to do something, I can do it. But on the other side of it, coming out of all those races, I also was suppressing my thyroid, because mainly what happens with endurance racing is that you become more and more conditioned to keep your body from taking in a lot of fuel, because it's basically survival mode. You're basically on that term of giving yourself, okay, being chased after a lion. Now I'm going to run, and I don't have time to eat. So you learn a lot about how to use supplements. So gels and Gatorade, and eating while you're training. And so there was some real benefit in knowing how to fuel my body while I was doing these things. But ultimately, the body has to shut down certain things for you to do certain things. And one of the things is the thyroid will start to lower, which will lower the metabolism. And so there's where we lead into where people will have weight gain after doing a lot of races. So you have to keep running, or you have to keep doing your endurance race, but when you stop, you gain weight, and that's because the metabolism has slowed down and you're not able to process the food, and so you start to diet, and then that causes more restriction. So there's this endless loop that kind of happens when you start to do endurance riding or racing, or doing any kind of anything that's going to create an cardio or intensity. Even weight training, like deep, intense training, can give you the same kind of reaction, because the body doesn't get that much rest. And when you are resting and you're trying to give yourself fuel and stuff like that, it's trying to recover, so it can't do a lot of repairing on certain times. So based on your diet and how your diet works, you kind of have to look at what happens. And one of the things that you'll see is you start to get night sweats, or you start to have cold feet, hands, certain things at night where you don't sleep really well. Most times that I would remember, I'd be so exhausted that I would crash, and then I would say, that was a sleep. No, that was a coma. That was my
Right.
body going,
Yeah.
hey.
Oh, yeah. I had many of those.
And the way to check that, to see what's going on with you, is definitely taking your temperature and pulse, especially when you wake up in the morning, to see how far your temperature and pulse have fallen.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second, because I know that the conventional wisdom on the pulse is that healthy is having a low pulse. And that's very contrary to what we've learned. And so the athletic pulse is low, right? So then since athletes' pulses are low, then everybody connects that to being healthy. But in reality, that's not really the case. Can you talk a little bit more about why?
Right, because what happens is the stress adaptation. So the body having, all this repetitive training, right? And so then it becomes adapted to that stress level. So it's going to be more efficient by using less fuel. So you can go harder and longer, but in the interim, when we come back to rest, your metabolism, like I said, is slowed down. So then if you look at how your temperature and pulse have to come down at the same, because it's just the body, right? The body is cooling itself off because it has been training so long. And to train, you have to think of what's going on: adrenaline, cortisol, things that are creating inflammation, because you're causing that inflammation with heavy breathing or your physical strain. So when the temperature and the pulse drop, you are so let me backtrack. So we look at the parts of how society really deems athletes as really like the top of the mountain. Like, they are considered, pictures of health. What the problem was is, like with Armstrong and Lance Armstrong, was, everyone was excited about how his pulse was like in the 40s,
Oh, yeah.
and the problem was they didn't recognize that you're not healthy that way. There's no there's not a reason why people don't can't correlate his cancer with his low pulse. Because if you start to recognize what happens in people who have any disease, their pulse is actually lower than the normal average, and even our average is pretty below normal, because if you come out and you're younger, your temperature and pulse is even higher. So you're closer to the 98.6, and your pulse is more 85. And I think in some research they've said that, babies come closer to the 90s and maybe in the 100 area, because that's more of the energy of that body is in a higher, I don't know if it's a vibration, but it's moving very quickly, and it's very, it has.
There's a lot of life there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A lot of life. And good way of saying that. And
Yeah.
so, because our as we get older and our functioning of our body is losing parts of that, the life is starting to slow down, there is this this incrementing of the pulse to start to drop. But if we start early in our life allowing our pulse to really lower, we're causing a lot of gut issues, digestive function issues, hormonal problems, decreasing of hair and skin growth. You have lots of symptoms that kind of seem like aging more than they seem like questioning of, like, is my lifestyle slowing my body down, and now my body is showing symptoms of things that I think are more acceptable because this is what society's doing, right?
Right.
So we need to kind of go back and say, wait a minute, if we're willing to go back to paleo diets and kind of talk about how, it's best to live like the caveman and, being without processed foods, we have to kind of go back and say, okay, well, were we always being chased by the lion? Like,
Yeah.
when did we rest? When did we, what did we eat is a part of it, but there's also about what's happening to our system at rest. And the morning temp and the pulse in the morning is exactly what happens after you've been hibernating or sleeping. And so it's the accurate test to see how high and how suppressed your system is by the cortisol and the adrenaline in the morning. And then if you eat something, what happens to the temperature and pulse after you eat something is going to show you, is that meal helping me or hindering me? And we can talk about whether or not people should have breakfast in the morning or not soon, but it's
Yeah. Right. I'm a big advocate of breakfast in the morning. I honestly can say that I'm not a big eater in the morning. I don't have a huge appetite, but I do make myself eat something because I know
Right.
my body responds really well to it. But
But
I
you
think
just
that, yeah,
really want to have like maybe something small. Like you can have your tortilla and eggs, like we talked about. You
right.
could have
Yeah,
some
that's been perfect.
cottage cheese with some fruit, a milk smoothie. Something doesn't have to be heavy. Like you don't have to have your big meal. You just have to have something. And a banana, and might work for some, but balanced your meal. So like if you have a banana, have a little bit of something else, like protein with the
Right. Balance
um,
out the macronutrient ratio is what you're saying?
yeah, that's where we're going to have to kind of see what's working for you, because the carbohydrates are what you need when you're exercising, because they're opening up, receiving more of that need for the muscle cells to have them. But there is a little bit of, because as we go into knowing how the body responds to endurance racing, is you can see tons of people talk about getting enough salt and enough sugar. The longer you go, the more you need to have. So in Ironman races, every water stop and there's every mile some kind of stop for the marathon racers. But one of the things is you have to know your body really well, and you need to train eating and drinking. And eating means, okay, if I have a gel, how's that going to set in my stomach and keep me going, right?
Right.
Um, so most of what we
Yeah,
get
that's
into.
interesting. That and that is really all that the endurance type of foods are really kind of weird to me. But I mean, I
Well,
guess it
if
all
you,
comes back to glucose,
yeah,
just getting
right.
that in your system. Yeah.
The easiest thing that's going to get into your system, right? Because
Uh,
if it's working hard, it's not going to take in a lot of fat. It's not going to take in a lot of protein because it's hard for the body to digest, and so it needs the quickest thing it can process. So it will go to sugar and salt. So there's certain things that kind of the body, it's a survival mechanism, right? So you're going to need to know what happens in a race for you. And some people can say, well, I can do the whole race without it. But what happens is that you basically have conditioned your body not to have any food because the stress hormones take over and suppress your appetite.
right, and that's adrenaline, and that gives you a different type of energy. And I think people think that's real energy sometimes. I wanted to also, I want to go back a little bit and talk about the average person working out. Like, for example, I'll say like a CrossFit class or something, but I don't want to poo-poo on CrossFit. I think there's many great things about CrossFit and that I've learned from CrossFit that are very valuable. But what I have seen in classes that are like that, and other classes, non CrossFit classes, it's kind of a trend, I think, to work, create a cardio workout with the weightlifting. So what I've experienced is the weightlifting. There's no rest in between the weightlifting. You're just going from one station to the next, going as hard as you can for 30 seconds to a minute, which is a really long time to be, giving it your all. And you're doing that for like maybe, I don't know, 3 to 5 circuits or something. And that's to me, that's very depleting. And so and it's not, in my opinion, like you're not getting the benefits from the weightlifting workout because you're
Right.
not really resting in between. So when I see people doing this often, it seems like that's almost the same as doing some kind of endurance sport in a way because you're actually just you're going into your stress hormones instead of letting your body relax and then creating that energy or taking a sip of something like some juice or something that has some glucose in it to give your body a little bit more electrolyte energy and then going in and doing performing another set. And
Yeah.
to
When
me,
I
I feel like it would be much more productive that way. Like I know personally I do better with that and then I'd see better results. But the trend, I guess, is what I'm saying is like a lot of people are doing or holding classes like this. This is the way I've not
well,
seen anybody do it any different.
I mean, I have to say, I watched one of the championship, whatever they call the CrossFit, for the pros or whoever the elites or whatever. And I literally, it reminded me of an endurance race in terms of these athletes were coming across the finish line dazed, confused,
Right.
exhausted. And it wasn't just because it was hot out, it was because they're depleted of glucose. I mean, they're having like what you would see the first time they did Ironmans, before everyone kind of knew about fueling themselves, is people are crawling across the finish line because they have literally, their body is shutting down, the arms and legs are no longer able to move. And I just saw actually a Facebook video of some people helping a woman across a marathon. Oh no, actually I take that back. It was a half marathon. That's 13 miles, right?
Yeah.
So, it doesn't matter the distance, it's mattering how much you are taking care of your system and whether or not you can perform in a state that is saying, I have enough glucose to carry out what I'm doing. And when I looked at the CrossFit, I said, oh, wow, they're exactly where these other sports had to be. They had to learn how to let the athletes figure out how to get some glucose to get their performance up, or they're all going to crash.
Yeah.
Like, it's just a endurance race with lifting weights, moving and running. And one of the issues about that is performing big weight and repetitiveness, is that you have to really have brain clarity, because you need to know if you're out of alignment, if you're throwing weights up
Absolutely.
really quick and fast. If that brain's not working, which the brain, as we talked about, is 95% glucose, and it needs to have glucose to function, shuts off the brain. That's why people look like they're, walking around, confused in a daze. It's because they are the body is saving its life by keeping everything else that it doesn't need to stop. So,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely. There's even I saw, I think maybe last year sometime, and I think this video had been circulating for a while. But on YouTube, there were videos of women basically peeing themselves, and it became a thing. They were urinating during lifts in the CrossFit competitions, and it was being celebrated. And I was like, wow, I was really taken aback by that. Like, what
Well,
is going on?
for you,
That's a huge problem.
I think you know most about that because of how you've helped people with um, what is it, diatus rectus, where
Oh
they
yeah, diastasis recti, and then the pelvic floor functioning, right? So,
right,
meaning
like,
that they're not really able to stabilize that amount of weight. So, should they
right.
be
So this is
lifting that?
a sign of, okay, something's not right. This is a sign of saying, okay, well, let's back up and let's look at this again, because um, you know whether or not you want to not be embarrassed by having that urination when you're, exceeding amounts of weight that your body is obviously saying, um, it's like being crushed by a big truck or something, right? Your fluids are going to go somewhere else. Why it's trying to be, it's being
Yeah, there's
compression,
pressure. There's
right?
lots of pressure. Yeah.
So, what's going on is there's a whole other structural thing going on. Plus, how are you, you know, are you continuing to ignore those symptoms and saying that's just normal, and, so be it. And I'd rather have, the top, place in the wood, or the, top place in the first of my age group or something like that, with the expense of knowing that my health is being maybe challenged, and I may be pushing myself farther than I can come back from one day. When we're young, it's easier. You can say, oh yeah, I recover pretty quickly. But we talk about this and joke about it, but we don't really see how often people don't take this seriously. Like, how many days of pushing yourself is going to make you break the camel's back, and you're going to have some serious issues, and I think one of my kind of pet peeves is connecting the dots is so hard for people because then they have to reconstruct themselves. And it's like you see the dots in front of you, but you will not connect them because some part of you has said, this is worth it. And it's more worth it than anything else. And I think, wow, like one of my things is like we're here for a longer time than we want to kind of say, like, because we'll forget about that success. We'll forget about that race. And if we do really great, we'll even diminish our greatness by saying, oh, that was just another race. And I really want to focus on this race now. It's that
Absolutely.
mentality. If it's never enough, even when you get it.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's you have to gauge where you are in that moment, and so many people base their identity around not being able to perform as good as they did yesterday. Well, every day is different, and your energy is going to be so different from one day to the next. It's more about just being honest with yourself, in my opinion, and trusting that, okay, you can say to yourself, hey, I'm not feeling as top, I guess, at the level I was yesterday. Let me just do a different workout today, do something that's a little bit more geared towards stretching or mobility or variability movement instead of my heaviest day, or just realizing that you have time and you don't have to hit your goal all in one workout, or you don't have to kill yourself.
Or every
I think part of
workout
it
doesn't.
too is the stress hormones. Like, people get really addicted to that, and the serotonin too. Like, we can talk about serotonin and yo-yo dieting as well. It's kind of a similar thing, I think. So the over-exercising, the cardio machines, getting that adrenaline high, but that's very short-lived, and then you just crash after that. And so
Yeah, and we want
over
to
the long
offer
term, it's really bad, in my opinion.
I think we really want to offer is, it's not to say these things are not doable. It's
It's like,
really
how do you do
learning
it well? Yeah.
how do you do it well for yourself, because
Right.
each person is going to be different, but there's always a little bit of a standard in some ways. Like if we say, it's best to eat breakfast, it's kind of coming from the idea of eating breakfast doesn't mean a big meal, but eating, at least 200 to 400 calories before a workout is adequate enough for like a 30 to 60-minute workout, right? So
Right.
if you kind of look at it as like, chunking, or as people talk as stacking or doing certain things, you got to be prepared for what you're going to do. And so that means, okay, I'm going to prepare for the morning, and I'm going to prepare for the workout, and what am I going to keep myself, if I sip on some orange juice with some salt and maybe a little baking soda to help the body stay replenished while I'm doing an intense workout, yeah, that's exactly what you need to do. And then, I'm going to, after my workout, I'm going to make sure, I eat something, or at least help the sensitivity to the insulin to be, allow for the food to be into the muscles and repair, that part of recovery, so like maybe a homemade chocolate milk, or maybe you can do like orange creamsicle smoothie,
Right.
something that has, a balanced meal for you that comes through your, end of your race. And I say this because I do know some endurance people that are really good about paying attention. But just for warning of those who kind of jump into this knowledge that, cardio is important, got to make sure you understand what cardio is doing. What do you mean by it's important? Did you rest well the other night? Did you get enough sleep to put yourself into another cardio or in high intensity workout the following day? That's what athletes learn. But a majority of people don't see themselves as athletes. They see themselves as, people who are an average, doing their fun and stuff like that. But we live such stressful lives that we don't even realize how everyone needs to be treated or act like an athlete. How am I going to recover from the stresses of my day?
Absolutely. And it can go in the other direction, where you're not getting enough exercise or any at all, and that can be stressful on the body too. So sitting for long periods of time, or, even, working out really hard and then sitting all day. That can be pretty stressful too.
Yeah,
And I recommend,
that makes
yeah,
me want to bring up what happens to athletes, young athletes, or for even my case when I'm still midlife. But I literally had to walk away after all those Ironmans because it was such a part of my life that my life wasn't able to focus on other things because I had focused so much on all that when I stopped cold turkey. But the problem is that non-movement even brought me into more of depression, weight gain. I think Nadia Comaneci in her, her comeback years after her first retirement was that she also had, you see this with a lot of athletes, they have a big depression. I think, what was
it
his,
happens to a lot of gymnasts.
right, the Michael Phelps, he just went through a big issue before he came back really strong and got his, retired again. You
Yeah.
probably experienced it with your gymnast years, and your body's
Yes.
recovering while it's gaining weight. And that's a problem for people with the idea of, oh, I'm fat now, I'm done with, or there's some kind of issue. And so then you don't want to move at all because you're feeling uncomfortable in your body. But once you kind of get a healing going, if you recognize just keeping yourself moving a little bit will help so many more things. And it's so
Yeah.
vital.
Yeah, I tell people start with walking. That's the easiest thing. I know that sounds kind of crazy sometimes, but um, you look at people in other countries who walk a lot, and that's really all they're doing a lot of times. There's some countries that don't even have gyms.
Right.
So, because they just walk all the time. And so that's a great way to start getting active without really having to think about it, especially if you've got low energy and you can't think of doing anything else. Now, if you have issues with injuries or something that it needs corrective exercise, then of course, that's going to be, you're going to need to get with someone who knows how to guide you through that. But yeah, aside from that, just changing your position all the time. Like when you're sitting if you're sitting at the computer, standing for a little bit or sitting on the floor. Katie Bowman has a lot of great info. She always talks about different positions of sitting, and I've learned a lot from MoveNat with that. Like, just there is countless ways of how you can sit, just positions of sitting. It's pretty incredible, and people rarely think about it because we, as a society, never are on the floor. We're on furniture. We're not really sitting on the floor, but there's tons of positions that you can sit on that. And people get uncomfortable on the floor when they sit because they're just staying in one position. But it really, when you're sitting on the floor, you're meant to move around because sitting in one position on the floor is not comfortable. But it actually, it is a catalyst to get you to move. So in my house, we do have furniture, but we have some floor space. So usually when we're sitting at the end of the day and watching a show together, my husband and I will just lay on the floor. We'll sit on the floor. It just gets me motivated to move around and stretch, Otherwise, if I was laying on the sofa, I wouldn't really want to stretch or do anything. I just lay there. So it the sofa makes your body a little more lazy than if you were on the floor. The floor is a little bit more stimulation for your body to move. So that's a good start.
I think that's what they call couch locked. Where
Oh, really? Yeah. I don't know if I've heard that.
There's another connotation to that meaning, but it basically means that the comfort of you're in a position that is actually not healthy for your body in terms of it locks you into maybe a head forward posture, curvature in the back.
Yeah.
Those things where you think I'm so comfortable, but if you look at how upside down or contorted you are, the body isn't able to flow very well, and then you get hypnotized by the TV and you forget you've been sitting there for an hour or two, and then you get up and you're like, why is my leg numb? Oh, well, maybe it's because you didn't move.
You're just melting into the sofa. Yeah, you need some pushback there. A little bit of pushback. That's what the floor provides.
Yeah, I mean, and I love where Katie Bowman talks about, like, even sleeping on a harder surface is more vital for your body because you do move more through the night, and there are some things that you can adapt to by being cognitive of how comfortable do you make yourself, like, because these comforts are little bits of like handicaps. They cast you in a position you think is comfortable, but really what's going on is it's weakening you. Like, I love out
Yeah.
of Z Health, they tell you, all these great tennis shoes and stuff like that about how, Duramax this and, have, the stability for this and that. And what they teach is to show, a smart shoe actually means a dumb foot because
Uh-huh.
it doesn't have to work anymore, or the weight systems, the weight belts, yes, I do believe that you should use them when you're getting into major weightlifting because of some stability issues. But I
Yeah, I
also
agree.
say,
Yeah.
there's other things of recognizing that if you're not doing your core work
Yeah.
or you're not stabilizing and you have maybe some dysfunctions in your lower limbs, then maybe there's something going on that you need to look at. And like Allison said, it's best to kind of work with someone who knows how to help you, work on those things as you adapt.
Right. Yeah, and it's that kind of thing. In my opinion, is better to work one on one with someone in person rather than online or something, because you need to have someone like actually being able to get close to you, looking at you, seeing, helping you figure out what's activating, what's not, and it's kind of almost like a therapist, physical therapist. But yeah, I mean, I think getting too comfortable, comfort is a luxury, and if we get too luxurious in that realm, it can make your body really lazy. And so, I mean, do
It's
you want to be resilient? Do you want to do you want your body to be able to adapt and and that kind of thing, and be strong in a natural way, like aside from the gym, just being able to create strength in your daily life. How you move, how you're sitting, your spine actually sitting on the floor, it actually activates much more because you're having to hold it up and you're having to get into that position, and there's nothing to lean back onto. So, it's
or
an incredible thing to think about, like how much value we can get out of that, as well as squatting. Just like squatting down to the floor, getting up and down off the floor is super helpful, and incredibly valuable. Because I know a study, there was a study a while back about how, I can't remember what it was, but it basically, the gist of it was that your ability to get up and down off the floor without using your hands is an indication of your longevity. So you're going to live longer
yeah,
if you can get up and down off the floor without your hands, which was
I agree.
interesting.
I agree with the idea of how do you know you can get off the floor without, or how do you fall? Like in
Yeah.
gymnasts, like I just saw the best video was this gymnast was helping a young gymnast on the bars, and
Hmm.
she kind of flips off and she's about to land in a bad place, and so he does his guidance and helps her. But what happens is the momentum throws both of them off, and in his ability as a gymnast and well trained in terms of how he knows his body, he went into a great fall, like a accelerated fall, so that they both kind of flipped out of it and not crashed onto her. And
Oh, wow.
it's an amazing video because it shows how instinctively he can go into this without having this concern of like what's going to happen. And I think what we're talking about the most is like places that where you can kind of come to a knowing of what your body's doing and your spatial awareness and peripheral, and how you are feeling in terms of like any moment you can walk off a curb, and how are you going to react? Like, is your
Yeah.
nervous system ready to handle some kind of change really quickly? And stressors really shut the nervous system down. It's the part of the fight or flight mechanism. And so if we really see how when we start to have too many stresses and the nervous system starts to do its, shut down or heighten, basically, and then the body starts to shut down, then what happens is you can't recover quick enough. You can't, from a simple trip, fall into your trip, right? They teach you how to fall in and roll. And when we don't practice that kind of stuff, we end up finding we're in more of this, like what they say, if you might break a wrist or break a hip when you get older, is because you're bracing yourself. And
Yeah, you're creating tension.
yeah, and so we
Yeah.
gotta get used to getting on and off the floor, because it is a practice that you and I, as we all get older, is to say, I'm not afraid of being down there, because it's not something that's
Right.
foreign anymore.
Well, I've trained countless people who are older and are just terrified of getting on the floor. When I ask them to get down on the floor, they're like, it's the hardest thing. That's harder than anything else." And
Yeah.
it's like, well, okay, let's start there, because that's what we need to work on. And so really just being able to function properly. And it's really interesting that you said that about stepping off a curb, or being ready for something coming your way, or falling, because I have a friend or a friend and client who just took a trip to Japan, and he was telling me how it's so interesting there. They're kind of very spatially aware, and unlike here, and so in the way of, like, if like they had kids with them, and their kids would like almost bump into someone, and the person would move out of the way without even looking, because they knew they were coming their way. It was really interesting. It was like kind of like, it's like the Matrix or something. And I said, oh, I bet that's because, like, they have to do, everyone there does qigong, right? So they're always doing, I guess it's is it both qigong and tai chi, you think they are, or just qigong? But it's
Well, they have the martial arts throughout their lives, right?
yeah.
So, you've
And I
got
think
all different
everybody
types of
has to
things.
do it. Everybody has to learn it, and so
It's a
that's an
cultural thing,
amazing.
yeah.
Yeah. So the reason that they have that spatial awareness and the feel for energy coming toward them is because of that slow movement. And so the slow movement is actually it can generate energy in the body, and it can make you more spatially aware. So that's why those kinds of things are really important, and why you a lot of times see older people doing qigong and stuff like that. But really, we all should be doing it, or
Well,
could be doing it.
and I'll add, it's also how they've made their culture is their floor. Like, the floor is the center of their being. I mean, everything is made to be squatting, or there is how you walk into the houses. They're made for you to be on the ground, like they're sleeping. Is not this luxury high bed. It is more lower to the ground, even on the bamboo floors themselves. So, if you really see cultures that stay close to the ground, there is more correlation to health, because you have older people consistently acting more like younger people, in terms of like children who roll on the floor, get up and off of the floor, move around. And when we, as cultures that take chairs and put ourselves in, couches, or do things, we are moving away from the floor. And that's not how our body is really made. It's made to go into full ranges of motion, and where your squat is a deep-seated squat, and there's debate on whether or not you should do a squat, full squat, with weights and all that. And that part of the brain stops you from even going into the squat, because you're afraid. And what we're saying is, really know the body is made to move around.
Yes. And you have to also, and that's taking taking consideration for where your body is in that moment as well. And so if there's something that, there's a certain restriction, then, take that in consideration. But experiment with things, and there's a lot of very creative ways to get up and down off the floor too. And MoveNat, I learned a lot of that from MoveNat and being in MoveNat, in the MoveNat certification program. And it's just really interesting. And you could spend a lot of time helping people with that, because people, they just aren't used to doing that, and it seems really simple. Or even just climbing over a log, or they have this what they call the tripod vault, where you put one hand on what you're going to be jumping over and the other leg on the other side, and your leg goes through the middle. And it's a really excellent leg technique, and it's very parkourish. But I've used that so many times when I've been on a hike, and a log has fallen on top of the trail, which happens a lot where I live. Or if I have to go underneath the log, you just kind of, you get real low in your squat, and you keep your back flat, and you go under. And so that's really useful too. So there's all kinds of useful, really functional movements that people should continue to just do on a regular basis. And work it into your day, even just think about those things that you're doing, and become aware of it.
Right. I mean, if you think about the transitions you can do, like people like to do planks, right? What can you do with a plank? Well, you can go into mountain climbers. Mountain climbers are, the side with your legs that move up and down, and you start to maybe go into a bear walk, or you go into a bear walk to a crab walk, or you go into a monkey if you do it side laterally. But all these are little tools that we're giving so that people can see the progression. You don't have to think that you're going to need to, deconstruct everything into this massive, overwhelming thing. What we're saying is start changing little bits and pieces of things. Like if you can't get to the ground, how often can you get to a lower chair? How often can you say, okay, well, let me do, I always like to tell people, if you're going to watch TV, do something while you're watching TV. Stretch, do whatever, or, people like to foam roll, and we can talk about that too some other day. But, if there's something that the body is saying to you, like I have a pain, well, then maybe work on it. Give yourself the option to kind of help your body, and you help the body by attending to what the body is asking. And movement is a big one that cries out when your body is stiff, when it's saying, I'm not, your mind's kind of giving you a depression, you're in a depression state. Take that walk for 30 minutes or 10 minutes, however long it is. If it's just around the cul-de-sac, just to do that is just one step of saying, what, I need to help my body move.
Even better if you have access to nature, if you have a park nearby, or a hike you can go on a regular basis. Like a different environment is really great too. It puts you at peace. You could do what I call a walking meditation, where you're just able to process your day.
Right.
Without anything, you're not listening to anything. You're not, you're by yourself, but you're walking, and, you're out somewhere peaceful, and it just helps you kind of, I guess, get rid of all the things in your head, and to kind of file them away. So, or if you couldn't figure something out that day, or if something, kind of stumped you, that's a good way to figure that out as well, and
because
put
the
it
body,
at peace.
If you connect to your body in terms of spatial awareness, so what is my arms doing? What are my legs doing when I'm walking? When I start to breathe, how is my breathing? Where is the stiffness?
That's a really good point. Yeah.
If you have stiffness somewhere, what is that stiffness about? Take a moment to even stop walking and stretch for a second. or if you want to kind of change it up because you're tired of walking, is there a tree next to you? Go and do a squat. Hold the tree, squat down. See if you can reset your hips and your feet in just a second. Just kind of putting yourself in a change of that. Then you can, leave, walk on, because sometimes the body is a little stuck, for being in maybe the car or in your desk all day long. And these are like, things that you can do. Maybe if you're like, we like a little path that we walk, and there's a nice big rock, and I like to, do a couple push-ups, just to change it up a little,
Oh, that's a good
right?
idea.
You
Yeah,
know,
yeah. You jump
incorporate it.
up onto something or
Yeah, step
uh,
ups, or
yep,
some, you can make your outside your playground. And
totally.
MoveNet is a great example of how you transition some of those great movements into being freer out in the world, and I think when you start to see how much more creativity you can bring into your simple walks, then maybe the walking won't be so like boring or not enough. Because we really want to explain that, in the beginning of the session we were talking about too much, right? The part of me that went into the lot of work here right now, to now the part of me that's gone from no work and then rebuilding. There's a great balance. You just have to kind of read what your body needs.
Yes, I'm at that point as well with myself. I went from being a really intense athlete to now I do what, I tap into my energy levels. I probably am lifting weights at this point 2 to 3 days a week, but nothing, maybe about 20 to 30 minutes of that. And most of it is just working my movement into my day. And so, as well as, we can talk about hanging another day, but hanging is great for, 'cause rarely do we do that. Most people haven't hanged on anything since they were a kid. You're not hanging on bars. You weren't hanging on bars since you were at a playground or whatever. Well, I guess if you're a parent and you have kids, you're probably going to, be at playgrounds and want to hang or something. But other than
Yeah.
that, I mean, I think for the most part, when I was a mom, I was so tired. I would just sit back on on the park bench and not do anything.
Well,
But
I'll
now,
tell you.
now it's like there's a lot of opportunity, of course, for you to, if you take your kid to the playground, run around with them, play tag, play a quick game of tag. That's a great sprinting exercise there.
Yes.
Hang on the bars, but just kind of, play. If you're mimicking your kids or you're playing with them or playing a game with them, you're going to be active, no doubt. So
Yeah, and we
that's a
we
great way to
can
do it.
we can add maybe a section about grip strength and what happens as you age. But one of the adaptations is, if you haven't hung in a while, what does that feel like on your hands? Because like for me, I haven't done it in a while, and then I started doing it every time I walked, and I realized how much my hands had to get used to that, like just
Yeah, that's
holding
a
my
big
body
thing.
weight. And
Yeah, I wanted to. That brings up something, calluses. I mean, like, what do you think about that?
yes.
Do you think it's
Well,
a
I
good
think
thing to
they're
have calluses?
necessary. I mean, if
Yeah.
you think about, if you're working with your hands, like artists, people who do yard work and stuff like that, you're going to use your hands as well as you use your feet in terms of walking, right? So we get calluses on our feet, but I think what we've done is we've forgotten, because it's all about like beauty, right? Especially for women, who wants calluses? Who doesn't? You want your nice nails, you want your white, beautiful hands, and it's the adornments that we put on ourselves. But if you think about how much that even limits our body, because our hands is a part of our body. If you don't recognize how important it is for your hands to be moving, which I actually just did a YouTube video on my website, and I sent it out to anyone who's interested in learning how to open up the hands. That
How do
is
we find you
so
on YouTube?
Maya Gottlieb, and
Okay.
you can go to my website, mayagottlieb.com, And it's just,
And is there a name? Is the video named anything?
yeah, it's a
What?
three-part series. I haven't got the third part out. It's the second part.
Okay.
It's about wrist stretches and how to help people with you know, any kind of hand issues or wrist problems. And so if you just look up wrists, you'll find it. It's pretty much right in the beginning of the sections. And then the
Okay.
second video
Cool.
is about fingers and stuff. And if I haven't made it even more obvious, the thumbnail of it is my hands, which are quite long fingers, and I'm literally stopped. You know, my hands are up in my face, so I've got
Right.
this whole thing about stop, listen. But what I really want to also add before we end is. You know, swimming is also a wonderful way of getting started back into movement if you haven't been moving for a while. Learning how to just get your body to move in water. You know, you don't even have to do a lot of laps. You can just do walking in water, or if you want to start swimming, you know, someone I'm helping with right now, she hadn't swum since she was 13 years old. And the progression that has started has really created an inspiration for herself, because she's actually feeling her stronger strength in her body. And upper body strength comes from swimming. Like, you really do a lot of great
Yeah.
upper body work, and it actually helps the mobility in the shoulder and the scapula when you do it well. and and so if you're just needing some ideas of how to move, I would suggest doing some water work.
Yeah, and anything that is going to take you back to your childlike self
Oh,
is going to be really
yes.
cool, because I know that I love to do the things that I loved to do when I was a kid, like the way I moved. Who wouldn't?
You're
So
you're so correct,
yeah,
and I have to really quickly add this.
yeah,
One of the things I hadn't done, and since I wasn't a gymnast and stuff, I didn't do many somersaults and stuff like that. But I did a backflip, like I was doing a backstroke, and I decided instead of turning like a regular flip turn, I would go backwards. And all of a
uh-huh,
sudden, I realized I was like, "Wait a minute, I haven't done this like in a long time." But once
right.
I got over the fear, and I was like, did it, and I was like, "Whoa, wow, I did it." And I felt the stretching of the body, and I was like, wow, okay. But I kept doing it, and I kept doing it. And now it just reminds me of how much I used to love to do backflips in the pool, because the feeling of that in the water is so like peaceful and inviting to the memory of how it is to feel so light in the water, and your body can do so many things without that gravity pull, right? So,
Yeah, it's nice. Yeah, it is a nice, really wonderful feeling to be able to float.
yes.
Yeah. So a recap, real quick. I just before we end today. So we first talked about how much is too much, and I feel like what we agreed upon was when your body starts to fail, that's a good indication that you've done too much. And it could be that you've done too much even before that, but that's like the straw that broke the camel's back. And then not enough would, of course, be, the effects of sitting too much, like total inactivity, getting sick all the time. I think it's kind of on each end of this spectrum has similar symptoms, right?
Right. I mean, we're
And
definitely
so,
looking at the paradox, right?
yeah, exactly. So if you can find something in the middle, and just know that you aren't really running a marathon. Maybe you are running a marathon, but if you're not running a marathon, that's not you just can think of each day as like, okay, I'm going to work as much movement into my day, but I'll also schedule these workouts, and then the workouts are based on what your energy is like that day. So if it's a low energy person, I would suggest doing workouts that are intermittent, like intermittently raising the heart rate, and then bringing it back down, instead of something that's sustainably like high and high endurance.
Right. And I think what I'd like to add too is we can go back later and really look at your sleep quality. whether or not your sleep is really the quality that you think it is, or if it's not, what's really keeping you from having a good sleep at night.
Cool. All right. That's awesome. Thanks, Maya.
Thanks, Allison. Talk to you
I'll
soon.
talk to you again next week.
Bye.
All right. So if you liked what you heard today, please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, and we're also on Google Play now, as well as you can subscribe to our podcast on any podcast app. I've found it's quite confusing, and things are changing in the podcast world, and this is all new to me. So if you have any problems or issues, feel free to visit my website at pureenergypdx.com and send me a message if you have some issues with that. I've had a few people contact me about that. And so, again, I'm just learning this myself, but we are on, again, Google Play, iTunes, and SoundCloud. And as well, you can listen to the podcast on my website. Thanks so much for listening. We appreciate you guys so much. I have this workshop coming up in Portland, Oregon in May. It's going to be May 13th. It's going to be called Nutrition for High Performance Women. And it's going to be about the symbiotic relationship between the thyroid and the liver and how they work together to help you produce energy, as well as to keep your metabolism and your metabolic rate healthy and high. And so when we're producing really good energy and the liver's working well, which is something we've talked about in the past, as well as the thyroid is working well. So we'll be learning about that, as well as how to regulate our energy and set healthy boundaries around our energy too, so that we can have lots of energy to do all the things we love, and including our own businesses, being mothers, being partners, and all of the above. So definitely check that out. If you want to sign up for that workshop, it's going to be again in Portland, Oregon, May 13th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. at Dick's Primal Burger in Portland, Oregon. And you can sign up for that on my website at pureenergypdx.com. Just go to the events tab, click on that, and you'll see it'll say the little sign up button will be below, and you can sign up there. Thank you so much. Next time we're going to be talking about apathy and the energy around apathy and how that relates to belief systems, self-sabotaging belief systems, and all of that kind of stuff. So definitely tune into that next week. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you next time.